To cut or not to cut? That's the question. Circumcision has been part of human culture for thousands of years. It's tied to religion, tradition, and in some cases, health. In 2015, an international research group estimated that about 38% of men worldwide have undergone circumcision. The numbers vary dramatically. In many Muslim-majority countries, rates reach 90 to 99%. But even in places far from those traditions, like the UK, Australia, Belgium, and Hong Kong, more than 20% of men are circumcised. In the United States, the rate is around 71%. Historically, circumcision became widespread in the US in the late 19th century, when doctors believed it could prevent everything from epilepsy to bad habits. Medicine has come a long way since then, but the practice remained common for decades. So what exactly are we talking about? The foreskin, or prepuce, appeared in early mammals roughly 100 million years ago. For humans, it's part of the standard biological package. And yet, evidence suggests circumcision has existed for at least 20,000 years, based on Paleolithic rock art studied by researchers Javier Angulo and Marcos Garcia Diaz. Why did ancient people start removing it? The foreskin acts like a protective hood for the glands. But that protection comes with a downside. The space beneath it can trap moisture and microorganisms. In hot regions like ancient Egypt or Mesoamerica, where people often wore minimal clothing and water was scarce, circumcision may have started as a practical hygiene measure. Ritual meaning came later. Today, hygiene and inflammation are still part of the conversation, along with other medical reasons. One example is phimosis, a condition where the foreskin doesn't retract as a child grows. For some, this can lead to discomfort or complications later in life. Circumcision is one of the ways this issue is addressed. Researchers have also studied circumcision in relation to certain infections. Some large-scale analyses suggest correlations between circumcision and lower rates of specific conditions, including those linked to certain strains of human papillomavirus, HPV. Countries where circumcision is common, such as Israel, report relatively low rates of penile cancer, though many factors contribute to those statistics. There has also been research examining circumcision and HIV transmission risk. Several randomized studies conducted in parts of Africa in the early 2000s found lower rates of HIV acquisition among circumcised men. These findings are part of broader public health discussions, but they don't replace safer sex practices or medical guidance. And what about sensitivity? Some people assume that removing the foreskin reduces sensation. But a study led by John Krieger at the University of Washington followed 3,000 sexually active men in Kenya. Half were circumcised at the start of the study, and half 2 years later. Participants reported their experiences throughout the process. The results? Many in the first group reported positive sexual outcomes, including maintained or even increased sensitivity. As always, individual experiences vary. Circumcision is a complex topic. Cultural, historical, biological, and personal. There's no single narrative that fits everyone, and no universal answer to whether it should or shouldn't be done. What we can do is look at the science, understand the history, and recognize that people's choices around this practice come from many different places, and that's baby science for you. Many women dread their period. The cramps, the mood swings, the exhaustion. PMS can feel like emotional turbulence, and the first day often hits the hardest. But here's the twist. Menstruation isn't just an inconvenience. It's actually a rare and fascinating evolutionary defense mechanism. Most mammals don't menstruate at all. Only higher primates, certain bats, and a small group of African mammals called elephant shrews experience anything like it. So why do humans have periods while most animals get by without them? Let's zoom out. Mammals fall into two major groups, monotremes and therian mammals. Monotremes, like the platypus, still lay eggs and have a single opening for everything, which is why they're sometimes called one-opening mammals. Avian mammals give birth to live young and split into marsupials and placental mammals. Humans belong to the latter. Among placental mammals, there are two reproductive strategies: the menstrual cycle and the estrus cycle. Estrus is what you see in cats and dogs, the classic heat cycle. Once or twice a month, your adorable pet suddenly becomes a relentless romance machine. Humans don't experience anything like that. In fact, people can conceive on many days of the cycle, though the odds are highest during ovulation, when an egg is released and ready for fertilization. During pregnancy, the embryo connects to the mother through the placenta. But here's where humans and other primates stand out. Our placenta directly contacts the mother's bloodstream. No protective barrier, no buffer zone, and that's a big deal. The placenta is genetically different from the mother. Half of its DNA comes from the father. In many mammals, the placenta is kept at arm's length, behind a layer of maternal tissue. But in humans, it plugs right into the circulatory system. That means the embryo can influence the mother's blood sugar, hormones, and more. It also means the mother's immune system has to tolerate a foreign organism inside her body. If something goes wrong, the mother's health can be at risk. So evolution came up with a strategy. Don't commit to every embryo. Only the healthiest should move forward. Here's the challenge. A sperm must fertilize an egg. The fertilized egg must travel to the uterus. And then it must successfully implant into the endometrium, the uterine lining. If implantation succeeds, pregnancy begins. If it fails, several things can happen. The rare and dangerous outcome is an ectopic pregnancy. The far more common outcome is that the embryo breaks down within the endometrium, which can disrupt hormones or cause inflammation. So the body takes precautions. If no successful implantation occurs, the uterus sheds the endometrium, along with anything that accumulated during the cycle. That shedding is menstruation. It's a biological reset button designed to protect the mother from potential harm. In other words, periods are an evolutionary safety feature. Sure, they're uncomfortable, but given how human reproduction works, with a deeply invasive placenta and a high-risk implantation process, menstruation is the most logical solution evolution could come up with. And hey, at least we're not salmon. They spawn once and die immediately afterward. A few rough days each month suddenly doesn't sound so bad. And that's baby science for you. Cannibalism shows up throughout human history, in myths, in rituals, in survival stories, and in the accounts of explorers and colonizers. But why did it happen, and what do we actually know about it? There are two broad explanations historians point to: survival and ritual. Survival cannibalism is the simplest to understand. When food is scarce and the choice is between starvation and doing the unthinkable, some groups throughout history resorted to it. It's grim, but it's part of the archaeological and historical record. Ritual cannibalism is more complicated. Some anthropologists believe it existed in certain small, isolated societies as part of funerary or spiritual traditions. Others argue that many stories were exaggerated or invented by outsiders. Take the Aztecs, for example. Spanish conquistadors claimed to witness ritual cannibalism during their campaigns. Some described roasted infants, others described hearts consumed after sacrifices. But these accounts need caution. Colonizers often portrayed indigenous peoples as monstrous to justify conquest. Ironically, early Christians in the Roman Empire faced similar accusations because outsiders misunderstood the symbolic language of the Eucharist. There's also a twist. Some ancient Romans practiced a form of medicinal cannibalism. Historical sources describe people consuming the blood or liver of gladiators as a supposed cure for epilepsy. And during the Renaissance, powdered Egyptian mummies were sold as a remedy for various ailments. It sounds bizarre today, but it was part of mainstream European medical practice at the time. In some cultures, families consumed the ashes of cremated relatives, a funerary ritual meant to honor the dead. Technically not cannibalism, but still unsettling to many modern readers. More extreme practices existed too. Some groups reportedly killed and consumed elderly members during periods of severe famine, a phenomenon known as geronticide, first described by Charles Darwin during his 1831 voyage to Tierra del Fuego. According to his notes, it happened only during the harshest periods of starvation. In the 20th century, the world was shocked by the behavior of Ugandan dictator Idi Amin, who openly claimed to have eaten parts of his enemies. Reports circulated that he stored human flesh in a refrigerator in his palace, a detail that fueled international horror and media fascination. And then there's William Seabrook, a journalist and traveler who, in the 1930s, wrote about tasting human flesh under controlled circumstances. He compared it to tough veal, a description that has been repeated endlessly in pop culture. Cannibalism is a vast topic with layers of anthropology, psychology, mythology, and history. From survival stories to ritual practices to colonial propaganda, it reveals as much about human culture as it does about human desperation. And that's baby science for you. So, anime. Whether you're a longtime fan or someone who still calls it those Japanese cartoons, sooner or later, the same question pops up. Does anime affect your mind? We dug through the research, and while there isn't a mountain of high-quality studies, there is enough to talk about what we actually know. Anime usually gets criticized for two things: sexual content and violence. But here's the thing, anime isn't a single genre. It's not something you can randomly put on for a toddler and hope for the best. Just like movies, anime has age ratings, and most of it is made for teens and adults. That's a huge part of why it's so popular both in Japan and in the West. Plenty of adult anime fans have heard the same line at least once. You're 40 and still watching cartoons? And anyone who's been in that situation knows there's no point arguing, because the criticism usually comes from people who've never watched anime at all. Some say it's all pornography. People who actually know the medium say, not even close. Yes, there is a genre called hentai, but that's a separate category, not the face of anime as a whole. Does adult content in anime affect the mental health of grown viewers? Hard to say. There simply aren't enough reliable studies to draw strong conclusions. As for violence, the conversation is similar to the one around video games. Games are often accused of promoting aggression, but research shows that violent imagery on a screen doesn't automatically translate into violent behavior in real life. The same logic applies to anime. What about anime obsession? A few studies surveyed several hundred college students who watched anime regularly. Participants were given statements and asked whether they agreed or disagreed. Here's what researchers found. About 10% said they were extremely passionate about anime. Only 13% said they strongly identify with the main character. Half of male participants and a third of female participants thought anime characters dress stylishly. Online, you'll often see claims that anime creates unrealistic beauty standards. There is some evidence that teens sometimes want to look more like their favorite characters, especially when it comes to the iconic large eyes. A few even consider cosmetic procedures, though these cases are rare. Most stick to makeup techniques inspired by anime aesthetics. But here's an interesting twist. Do Japanese viewers, the biggest consumers of anime, even see these characters as white? A 2009 study by Amy Liu at Northeastern University asked over 1,000 participants to classify 341 anime characters by race. Results showed that white participants tended to see the characters as white. East Asian participants saw far fewer European features and were more likely to say the characters looked Asian. So the idea that anime universally promotes Western beauty standards is far from settled. In the end, Japanese animation isn't nearly as scary as critics make it out to be. Like anything else in pop culture, there are extremes, but the medium itself isn't inherently harmful. and that's baby science for you.